The morning sun shimmered across the still waters of Lake Pinewood, its golden rays dancing with the ripples as if nature itself was breathing calmly. For Marcus, this lake was more than just a body of water. It was his sanctuary, his escape from the noise of the world. He had grown up fishing with his grandfather, who taught him patience, respect for nature, and the quiet satisfaction of pulling a catch from the water after hours of waiting. Now, as a grown man working long, stressful hours at his engineering firm, Marcus cherished these weekends where he could bring his folding chair, set up his rod, and sit in peace, letting the world fade away with the gentle tug of a line. But peace never lasted long in neighborhoods ruled by power-hungry HOA leaders. Marcus had been out on the dock for nearly an hour when he noticed the sharp sound of heels clicking against the wooden boards. He didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood and president of the HOA, marched toward him with her ever-present clipboard tucked under one arm, lips pursed in that familiar expression of disapproval. She was the type who spent more time policing mailbox colors and measuring lawns than actually talking to her neighbors. "Excuse me," she said in a voice dripping with condescension. "Fishing is not permitted here unless you have HOA authorization." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He had lived in the neighborhood for years, and fishing at the lake had always been allowed. He calmly replied, "This lake has always been open. Families come here all the time. I'm not breaking any rules." Karen smirked and tapped her clipboard. "New regulations. As of last month, the HOA board decided fishing requires a permit. And since you don't have one, you're in violation." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. A permit to fish at the same lake he had been coming to since moving in? He looked around at the families enjoying picnics nearby, kids skipping stones, and even another neighbor quietly casting a line further down the shore. Yet, Karen's eyes were locked only on him. She scribbled furiously on a form and, without hesitation, tore it off and shoved it toward him. "Here's your fine, $500, payable within 30 days. Marcus froze for a moment, staring at the paper in his hand. $500 for fishing? It wasn't about rules, it was about power. He noticed the smug glint in Karen's eyes as she turned on her heel, heels clacking against the dock as if punctuating her victory with every step. She had singled him out deliberately, and Marcus knew it. As Karen walked away, Marcus sat in silence, the once peaceful lake now a mirror of his frustration. He could have argued more, could have yelled or caused a scene, but instead, he folded the ticket neatly and tucked it into his tackle box. He stared out at the water, watching the sunlight ripple over the surface, and a slow, steady smile spread across his face. Karen thought she had won. She thought a $500 fine would put him in his place. But what she didn't know was that Marcus had something far stronger than anger brewing inside him: determination. That fine wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark that would set everything in motion. By the following week, the entire neighborhood had heard about Marcus's fine. News traveled fast in Pinewood Estates, especially when Karen made sure of it. She didn't just file away Marcus's violation quietly. No, she paraded it around like a trophy. At the community meeting that Friday night, she stood at the front of the clubhouse, her clipboard clutched like a scepter, and proudly announced that rules were being enforced equally and that certain individuals who thought they could get away with breaking regulations had been fined accordingly. Though she didn't say Marcus's name, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The whispers began almost immediately. Couples leaned in close to murmur about it. Children giggled at the idea of someone being fined for fishing. And a few of Marcus's neighbors gave him quick, uncomfortable glances before looking away, as if they feared Karen might target them next just for associating with him. Marcus sat quietly in the back row, arms folded, observing the circus in silence. He noticed how Karen's lips curled into a smug grin every time she scanned the room and caught someone nodding in agreement. She thrived on control, on the fear she instilled in people who didn't dare question her. What struck Marcus most wasn't the fine itself. He could pay it if he chose to. It was the principle. This wasn't about protecting the lake or preserving nature. It was about power. The HOA had been slowly tightening its grip on the neighborhood, and Karen was at the heart of it all. She had fined a young family last month for having chalk drawings on their driveway, claimed it was defacement of property. She had berated an elderly couple for planting flowers that weren't aesthetically consistent with community standards. Each time, the neighbors grumbled in private but never resisted. Now, it was Marcus's turn to be the example, the one Karen wanted to humiliate so everyone else would stay in line. But Marcus wasn't the type to back down. After the meeting, as people filed out, Marcus caught snippets of conversation. "It's ridiculous finding a man for fishing," one neighbor whispered. Another muttered, "Better him than us." Karen would have found someone eventually, and that was the moment Marcus understood the truth. His neighbors weren't supporting Karen, they were afraid of her. Fear made them compliant, and compliance gave her power. She wielded that power like a weapon, and as long as everyone stayed quiet, she remained untouchable. Karen spotted Marcus on his way out and made a point to stop him. She leaned in close, her perfume sharp, her smile thin and venomous. "I hope this fine teaches you to respect the rules," she said in a tone that carried just enough volume for others nearby to hear. "After all, rules keep the community safe and fair. Don't you agree?" Marcus didn't reply. He simply looked at her, his calm expression betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside him. Then he gave a small nod, turned, and walked away. Karen mistook his silence for surrender, the smug grin returning to her face as she strutted back toward her circle of supporters. But as Marcus walked home under the dim glow of the streetlights, his mind was already working. He wasn't just going to fight the fine. He wasn't going to argue with Karen or beg for leniency like so many others had. No, he was going to find a way to take back the power she held over the entire neighborhood. And he would do it in a way that Karen, for all her arrogance, could never see coming. The night after the HOA meeting, Marcus sat at his desk with his laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes as he sifted through public county records. Karen thought she had humiliated him, but what she didn't realize was that Marcus had the kind of mind that thrived on details. He had always been meticulous, a trait sharpened from years of engineering work, and he knew that the HOA's authority was only as strong as the paperwork that supported it. If Karen wanted to play the game of rules, then he would dig deeper than she ever imagined. It didn't take long before he stumbled upon something curious. The lake, the very one the HOA loved to flaunt in their brochures and rulebooks, wasn't listed under the HOA's property holdings. Frowning, Marcus scrolled further. The land surrounding the lake had been deeded to the developer years ago, but after the development company went bankrupt, the property had gone into foreclosure. Buried deep in the county's online auction listings, Marcus saw it. Lake Pinewood and its surrounding acreage were listed as available for purchase, with a price far less than what he expected for such prime land. He leaned back in his chair, stunned for a moment. All those years of Karen handing out fines, making people believe the HOA owned the lake, enforcing lake rules that had no legal weight at all, it was smoke and mirrors. The realization hit him like a lightning strike. The HOA had no actual authority over the lake. They were bluffing, and everyone had believed them. Marcus's mind raced with possibilities. He could expose Karen immediately, drag her in front of the same neighbors she manipulated, and show them the truth. But then he thought better of it. Public humiliation might sting, but Karen was the type who would twist the narrative, make herself the victim, and keep clawing for control. No, Marcus needed a permanent solution, something that would take her power away completely. He opened a new browser tab and began researching the auction process. The county required a minimum bid, proof of funds, and a straightforward application. It wasn't impossible. In fact, compared to some of the investments Marcus had managed in his career, this was relatively simple. But he couldn't do it alone. The cost, while affordable for land, still required liquidating assets he wasn't ready to part with. That night, he made a few calls to close friends and one old colleague who owed him a favor. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the horizon with pale orange light, Marcus had secured enough backing to make a serious move on the lake. He shut his laptop, exhaustion settling in, but a fierce determination burned brighter than any fatigue. Karen had tried to trap him with a $500 fine, but Marcus wasn't just planning to avoid paying it. He was planning to buy the very lake she thought she controlled. The thought made him chuckle softly to himself as he finally leaned back in his chair. Soon, Karen would learn a lesson she could never erase with her clipboard or her smug smile. And this time, Marcus wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting to free the entire neighborhood from her grasp. The day of the county auction arrived with the kind of tension Marcus hadn't felt in years, the kind that made his chest tighten and his hands sweat despite his outward calm. The courthouse annex where the auction was being held was a nondescript building, beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights. But to Marcus it might as well have been an arena where the future of the neighborhood would be decided. He walked in wearing a simple navy suit, carrying a folder with proof of funds and the paperwork he had prepared meticulously the night before. The auction room buzzed with low murmurs as real estate agents, investors, and a few curious locals shuffled in and out, waiting for their chance to bid on foreclosed homes, vacant lots, and small commercial properties. Marcus sat quietly in the middle row, his eyes focused, his mind steady. The lot he wanted, parcel 1892, Lake Pinewood and surrounding acreage, approximately 37 acres, wasn't until midway through the session. As the auctioneer rattled through property after property, Marcus barely heard a word, his heart drumming harder with each passing minute. When the auctioneer finally called out the lake property, Marcus sat up straighter. "We have Lake Pinewood. Starting bid at $75,000, the man announced, his gavel poised. A hush fell over the room. Clearly, this was more than just an empty parcel. It was land with history and potential. Marcus's hand shot up almost immediately. 75, do I hear 80? The auctioneer barked. Another hand rose from across the room, a man in a tan blazer who looked like a developer. Marcus countered without hesitation. 85, 90, 100. The numbers climbed quickly, each bid hammering at Marcus's nerves, but he never wavered. He had prepared for this. He knew his ceiling, and more importantly, he knew his resolve. The other bidder hesitated when the numbers reached $150,000. The man frowned, whispered to his assistant, then shook his head. 150, going once, going twice. The auctioneer scanned the room, but no one else raised a hand. Sold. To the gentleman in the navy suit for $150,000. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and Marcus exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Just like that, the lake, the very heart of the community, the weapon Karen had wielded for years, belonged to him. After the paperwork was signed and the deed handed over, Marcus stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The weight of the documents heavy in his hand, but the weight on his shoulders suddenly lifted. He stared down at the papers, unable to suppress the smile spreading across his face. Karen had fined him for fishing, believing she had the power to control him. Now, with one calculated move, he had taken the crown jewel of her so-called authority. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had tried to squeeze $500 from his pocket, and instead he had turned the tables and bought the very thing she thought she ruled over. He imagined her face when she found out, the way her smug grin would falter, the way her control would crumble in front of the neighbors who had once feared her. That moment alone would be worth every penny he had spent. But for Marcus, it wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. This was bigger than a petty fine. It was about ending the reign of fear Karen had built and giving the neighborhood back its freedom. With the lake deed tucked safely into his briefcase, Marcus walked away from the courthouse not just as a man who had won an auction, but as the new owner of Pinewood Lake and the man who now held the power Karen could never take back. When word spread that Marcus had purchased Lake Pinewood, the neighborhood practically erupted. At first, many dismissed it as a rumor. Surely the HOA owned the lake, right? That's what Karen had told them for years, parading her authority as if it were carved into law. But when Marcus quietly posted a copy of his deed notice on the community bulletin board and filed the property transfer with the county clerk's office, the truth became undeniable. Karen stormed into the HOA's next board meeting red-faced, slamming her clipboard onto the table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. "This is a mistake," she barked, her voice shrill with panic. The HOA owns the lake. We've always owned the lake. But when she demanded the board produce proof of ownership, the room fell into an uneasy silence. The treasurer fumbled through a binder of old records, pages yellowed and half empty, and finally admitted what Marcus had already discovered. The HOA never had legal rights to the property. For years, they had been enforcing rules and collecting lake maintenance fees without any legitimate authority. The board members avoided Karen's furious glare, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the reality sank in. Marcus, who had decided to attend the meeting, sat calmly in the back of the room. When Karen spotted him, her fury turned into desperation. "You think you can just waltz in here and steal our lake?" she hissed. Marcus stood, his voice steady, his presence commanding. "Not steal," he said, evenly holding up the deed. "I bought it legally. It's mine now. And from this moment on, the HOA has no authority over it." The words hung heavy in the air. Karen's jaw tightened, her face draining of color. The same neighbors who once feared her suddenly looked at Marcus with wide eyes, a flicker of relief breaking through their caution. For the first time, Karen's grip on the neighborhood cracked. Panic coursed through the board as they realized everything they had enforced, every fine, every fee tied to the lake, could collapse in an instant. Karen tried to protest, to argue, to claw back some measure of control, but the deed in Marcus's hand silenced her more effectively than any words could. The power she had flaunted for years was gone, and Marcus hadn't just challenged her authority. He had shattered it with a single stroke of his pen. The very next weekend, new signs appeared around Lake Pinewood. They were simple, sturdy, and impossible to miss. Private property, access by permit only. Below the bold letters was Marcus's signature and contact information. The neighborhood buzzed with shock, whispers spreading like wildfire. For years, the HOA had strutted around claiming the lake as their jewel, their centerpiece of authority. Now, every resident who wanted to fish, swim, or launch a boat had to go through Marcus. The irony was delicious. Karen stormed down to the shoreline the moment she saw the signs, clutching her clipboard like a shield, her heels stabbing into the dirt with every furious step. She confronted Marcus as he was setting the last sign into the ground. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "The lake belongs to the community." Marcus calmly tightened the bolts and straightened the sign before turning to face her. "Correction," he said evenly, pulling the deed from his back pocket and holding it up. "It belongs to me. If the community wants access, they can purchase permits. Simple as that." His voice carried, and several neighbors who had gathered nearby exchanged stunned glances, some even suppressing smiles. Marcus wasn't unreasonable, though. He announced that families who had respected the lake and never caused trouble would be granted free or discounted permits. Children who came to skip stones or fish with their parents wouldn't be charged a dime. But as for Karen and her HOA board, who had turned the lake into a tool of fear and fines, they would pay the highest rate, and every penny would go directly into Marcus's pocket. The news spread fast. Some neighbors were thrilled, finally freed from the HOA's fake authority. Others hesitated, afraid of what Karen might do next. But the tide was turning. Marcus had rewritten the rules in bold ink, and for the first time in years, the HOA no longer controlled the community's most cherished space. Karen stood there, shaking with rage, realizing she would now have to pay the very man she had fined just to fish in the lake she once pretended to own. It was justice served, and Marcus wasn't done yet. As weeks passed, the balance of power in Pinewood Estates shifted completely. Neighbors who once cowered under Karen's rules now walked with their heads high, grateful that Marcus had exposed the truth. The lake, once a symbol of the HOA's false authority, became the heart of the community again. But this time, under Marcus's ownership. Families gathered at the shoreline without fear of bogus fines, children laughed as they splashed in the water, and people spoke openly about how Karen's reign had ended. The only ones who didn't share in the joy were Karen and her board members. To enjoy the very lake they once claimed to rule, they now had to purchase permits for Marcus like everyone else. The sight of Karen writing a check to the man she had fined for fishing was nothing short of poetic justice. She tried to protest, of course, tried to rally the board to sue or challenge the purchase, but the deed was ironclad. Lawyers confirmed what Karen already knew deep down. Marcus legally owned the lake, and there was nothing she could do. Her smug grin had vanished, replaced by tight-lipped bitterness, and her once commanding presence at HOA meetings had dwindled to silence as neighbors ignored her attempts to reclaim authority. For Marcus, the victory wasn't just about personal satisfaction, though seeing Karen's humiliation was sweet. It was about restoring fairness to a neighborhood that had lived too long under fear and pettiness. He managed the lake with kindness, giving free access to elderly couples, single parents, and children who loved fishing as much as he did. The community flourished, united not by rules written on Karen's clipboard, but by respect and trust. Standing on the dock, one quiet evening, Marcus cast his line into the shimmering water and breathed deeply. This lake, once a weapon used against him, was now his sanctuary again, and a symbol of what happens when you stand up to tyranny. Karen had come for him with fines and threats, but in the end, it was she who was left powerless, her HOA reduced to a whisper of its former self. The tables had turned forever, and Marcus, the man they tried to break, now held the one thing they could never take back: freedom.